It is Friday, and we are working for Crusoe. Friday, February 21st, 2025. In Los Angeles, he is Sam Park. In Los Angeles, I am John Ramey. Modi, Munich, Marco, Mar-a-Lago. We like alliteration, and Sam Park, that beautifully wrought headline, courtesy of your exquisite writing skills, just has me all a Twitter. We'll go in order, if that's all right.
Sure.
Okay. Narendra Modi is the Prime Minister of India. Dateline Washington, the Associated Press reports, Donald Trump greeted Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the White House with a bear hug on Thursday and called him, quote, a great friend of mine.
Now, that was last Thursday, mind you. This is
Okay,
not
yes,
yesterday.
sorry, yes. Thank you. Last Thursday. But nonetheless warned that India won't be spared from higher tariffs that Trump has begun imposing on U.S. trade partners around the world. Trump, who had previously derided India as, quote, tariff king, called the import levies imposed by Modi's country, quote, very unfair and strong. He went on to say, whatever India charges, we will charge them. So frankly, it no longer matters to us that much what they charge. India is the most populous country on earth, biggest democracy on earth, pretty big market, Sam.
Sure. And to be fair, actually, the average tariff that India charges on goods that they import from the United States is about 9%. That's not exorbitant, but
Sure.
it's not low.
What are we sending the Indians?
I have no idea, honestly. Right?
Okay.
I mean,
they make their own motorcycles.
Sure. I mean, but it's probably, industrial goods and things like this,
Sure.
right? Probably, I imagine a fair amount of agricultural exports also. I mean, India.
Sure. A lot of people to feed.
Exactly. And so, 9%, that's pretty high. But this also coincided with Trump's unveiling of his apparently global plan for reciprocal tariffs, where he's just going to charge every country the same tariff that they charge the United States. Now, as I sort of began to discuss last week, that's a lot of work. Right? I mean, you have to find out what every country charges. And it's not just a lot of work for American bureaucrats, right, in the Treasury Department or the Commerce Department or whoever figures these things out. I don't know who that is. Right.
That's the bean counter agency.
That's right. Exactly. Right. So, I mean, you have to do a lot of math. It's also, though, a big problem for businesses. Right. I mean, because
to figure out what it's actually costing them to do business.
Exactly. Right. And so, I mean, this is a boon for accountants, but, that work for corporations.
Sam, won't AI just automatically be able to do this?
I mean, it's possible, I guess.
I don't think yet. I don't think we can trust it just yet on this.
But the point is that this is, as we know, tariffs are taxes, right? And taxes are regulations, right? So Trump says he wants to cut regulations, and in many ways, I'm sure he will do that. But he's creating a large regulatory burden for any business that does international transactions of any kind. And again, I'm not quite sure why he thinks this is a good idea, but it's just not. Now, Modi's visit in general is just one of many that I think are going to be upcoming. For instance, both Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and French President Emmanuel Macron are going to be visiting next week. Not together, unfortunately, but
that would have been great.
It would be, right? So I expect that this will continue. For instance, Javier Milei was in town yesterday, or in D.C., that is. Now, I'm not sure if
without his chainsaw.
No, actually, he had the chainsaw. He was at the CPAC Conservative.
Oh, and they
Political
love
Action
that, of
Committee.
course,
Yeah.
yes.
And he was on stage with Elon Musk, and Elon Musk got to wield the chainsaw. And I'm sorry to have to be the one to have to tell you about this.
Sam, you'll forgive me for not rigorously reviewing the props at CPAC.
Yes, I will forgive you for that. That's true. And so
hopefully the audience will too.
I think they also will. Yes, but there's so many of them that it's difficult to, that there
Who can
could,
say?
yeah, exactly. And so I don't know if Millet actually met with Trump. I didn't hear about it. I suppose it's possible. But the point is that it's still, as of yesterday, just 1 month that Trump's been president, although it feels like 30 years. But so I'm confident that there will be other foreign leaders that will be coming to essentially so that Trump can hold court, basically, which is honestly his ceremonial right as president. There's nothing actually controversial about that.
Okay. Anything else on Modi, or can we move to the Munich Security Conference?
Well, while we're mentioning people like this, Modi, while he was meeting with Trump, there was the idea that he might increase defense imports from the United States,
Well, I
right?
guess that's one thing we can send them.
Yeah, including F-35 fighters, right? Unfortunately,
big ticket item.
yeah, exactly. They're very expensive. To the point actually where they're high up on the cut list for Elon Musk at the Department of Defense, who actually issued a statement within a day or two of Modi visiting saying, "Oh, the F-35, it's terrible." Right? It's much too expensive. It's going to be obsolete soon because we're just going to have enormous drone aircraft that will do the job much better. And so people don't really seem to be getting their messages straight. I thought that was at least a little amusing. But yeah, honestly, Modi's visit was not all that consequential. But on the subject, immediately after that, Russia made an offer to sell fighter jets to India also instead that will be much less expensive. So, I mean, to be fair, Russia has always been the chief arms supplier to India
Sure.
for many, many years. So,
As you've mentioned in previous episodes, there was an unofficial, or it was generally acknowledged India was kind of more on the USSR side.
absolutely. During the Cold
From
War,
an
yeah.
economic sense.
Not just that, but also in a sort of anti-colonial sense,
Sure.
right? Because
And also their neighbors.
that's certainly true, right? It's just easier to ship.
But yeah, I get anti-colonial, sure. Right.
But yeah, we can, there'll be more to talk about in reference to India as time goes on. It's an important country, so we can move on to our other topics.
Okay. Munich. Foreign Policy Magazine. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance ignited a firestorm. In a fiery and unorthodox speech, Vance declared that, quote, "there is nothing more urgent than mass migration," and accused European leaders of suppressing free speech and censorship, including by referencing Germany's far-right Alternative for Germany, AfD party. Editor's note, those are the inheritors of the Nazis, the spiritual descendants of the Nazis,
Yes.
which German intelligence has classified as extremist. The biggest security threat facing Europe was not Russia or China, he said, but the quote threat from within.
Yes. Which he seemed to believe was the governments and political processes of European countries. And the to be fair, more strict free speech laws that exist, especially in Germany, but in
For
many
good reason. Those
Yes, that's
laws
right.
are not just there to irritate conservatives.
That's right. But I think that Americans, for example, might be alarmed at how strict some of their speech restrictions are.
Totally. Yeah, I get it.
There was a very good story on 60 Minutes last Sunday about this, which I would encourage our listeners to look up. It would be alarming to Americans, but as you say, there's reasons.
America hasn't started two world wars.
That's right.
Like it's just a different deal there.
Yeah, there's just a reason why these things exist.
Yeah.
But the point about this is that Vance was speaking at the Munich Security Conference, right, which is ostensibly about international affairs, and a few days
how
later,
we're going to deal with Russia or China
or whatever the security,
Islamic terrorism. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Right. This is normally what this is about, and this, of course, followed on the heels of Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth's comments just a day or two earlier, saying that Ukraine wasn't going to get all of its territory back at the end of any peace negotiation and would not be allowed to join NATO, right? Seeming to parrot uh, Kremlin talking points about what Russia wanted as a result of the end of the war, if the war could be brought to an end. And so, following up from this, uh, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, was appeared on Face the Nation on Sunday, and he was asked about all of these things, and he said, "Oh, well, plenty of European leaders have said awful things about President Trump, right, and defending Vance in these terms." First of all, I'm not so sure that's true, right?
On the record, no.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
maybe one or two here or there, right? But none of them on the level of the vice president of the United States uh, has done anything like that inside of a European country that was, I'm sorry, inside of the United States
Right.
9 days before a national election in the United States, because doing so would be far out of bounds. And Germany, which is where Munich is
having an
going
election,
is
yeah.
having an election in and 2 days from now, 9 days from when Vance made these comments. It's outrageous for him to have
I mean,
done this.
think about that. Think about some foreign leader coming here on the 3rd of November,
Right.
2024, and, giving a full-throated endorsement to any party.
That's right. And
It's outrageous.
it is. And now we'll be returning to this topic next week when we discuss the German elections at some length, because Germany's an important country. They're having an election in the midst of all this stuff going on all around them in Europe. Their economy is not doing especially well. So we'll be discussing this in great detail. And so we don't need to go into a lot of detail about this right now. I should mention, however, though, that, and by way of apologizing to our listeners, Vance also mentioned the elections in Romania last November, which we did not cover, right? Because we had a lot of other things going on. And
Was there another election last November?
well, the thing is, there wasn't, right? Or they had part of it.
No,
and
no.
then it,
There
and then
was. It was the U.S. election.
Oh yeah, no, exactly, yeah. But they had part of the election in Romania. Then the High Court there overturned it. So that's
Oh, this had to do with the social media scandal or the
That's
social
right.
media policies about influencing elections. Yeah.
exactly right. So they, we figured at that point that, well, since they didn't actually have the election,
Right. It was under review.
yeah, and we
They
had
were looking at the replay.
yeah, they're going to have the election in May. So we'll get around to that. But this is part of, like, Vance's comments were just one in a series of events that are ongoing until today, all about, for instance, Vance didn't mention Ukraine more than in passing. Uh, uh, you would think that that might have been a main topic of conversation, but all these things, Hegseth's comments, Vance's speech, some of the things that have happened since then. The main takeaway seems to be that the United States just doesn't like the European Union. And that, I think, is the main tenor of what's going on in United States security relationships around the world right now, is a rift between the United States and, let's face it, mainly Western Europe, although
Sure.
some of the NATO allies are also in Central and Eastern Europe.
So, am I being am I not being charitable enough when I describe the current foreign policy stance of J.D. Vance, MAGA, but also AFD and other far-right European parties as essentially saying we care far, far less about the post-World War II order that has kept Europe from tearing itself apart like it did twice in the first half of the 20th century, kept the peace for 80 years, because that peace has brought about too much immigration, has brought about too much not what we consider to be our culture. They're basically saying we would prefer to trade the guarantees of peace for some kind of racial or cultural purity. Is that too cynical?
I think that is a logical extension of the comments that have been made by various members of the administration this past week. They haven't said that explicitly,
but it's what they're obviously intending,
that's right.
There's no other way to explain ditching 80 years of functional Pax Americana.
Well, I mean,
I guess they don't feel it's functional because there are too many taco trucks or whatever.
The other way to explain it is that they're just a bunch of goons, right? Which is, I mean, that's
they're not mutually exclusive.
That's right. But they could just be dumb goons, right? And so, either way, I don't think.
But J.D. Vance has read a history book.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know if he cares about the history books that he's read. Again, when I say I don't know, I mean that very literally.
No, I understand.
Right? He might care, he might not care. That's not why he's doing this, right?
It's just so reckless. The only way you can understand this slash and burn approach to America's leadership in the world is that they're being motivated by something so totally foreign to kind of just conventional thinking since the Second World War.
That's right. But as we've mentioned before, it's Trump really does seem to want to return the world to a kind of 19th century imperialist point of view, right? Where great powers have spheres of influence. And that's just the end of it, right? We have our sphere of influence and you have yours. And the other great power has their sphere of influence. And here and there, those spheres will collide with one another, and maybe we'll have a war, right? But that's the extent of it, right? None of this multilateral institution building or anything like that. He seemed to view that sort of thing with outright disdain. Now,
it's like they don't understand a great power conflict in 2025 is a fundamentally more dangerous proposition for humanity than it was in the 19th century.
Or care, right?
Right.
But if
it's reckless.
It is, but it's a question of what your values are, right? If what you value is power, then the recklessness doesn't matter, right?
Can't be in power in nuclear winter.
That's not how this works from their point of view, right? It's in this point of view, it's not that they necessarily think that war is good, but
they seem to think it's manageable or an acceptable risk,
or that it's fun, right?
Or somehow good. Again, a 19th
that's right.
century
It's a
kind
purifying
of thinking,
or noble act,
galvanizing
right?
for the culture of the nation.
Hegseth said that he wants to restore a warrior ethos to the Pentagon, right? As if, they're a bunch of hippies, right? But the point, if
I mean, it's laughable.
But again, the logical extension is that if the Pentagon now lacks a warrior ethos, then he seems to believe that they should become more warlike than they are now. And
why haven't they changed the cabinet name to the Secretary of War like it used to be?
Exactly.
They might not know it used to be called that, but that seems like low hanging fruit for their messaging.
They might, don't give them any ideas.
Actually, It's the 21st of February, 2025. Before 2028, that position will be called the Secretary of War.
It could be.
If not the department.
It would surprise me not at all if they did such a thing. Let's put it that way.
Sorry. Again, I have enjoyed not enduring a nuclear exchange in my lifetime. I just feel like that is not a
well, you haven't compared it to having one, so I mean, you can't really make an informed judgment here, John.
I know, right? I'm just some lefty,
Yeah, what do you know?
Yeah. Josh Hammer, who is a columnist for Newsweek, appeared at CPAC, wrote a column in the Los Angeles Times, a publication that you and I regrettably do not read very much because of how much it has slipped in content quality. Hammer wrote this: J.D. Vance's speech on the 14th of February at the Munich Security Conference was not merely the most important speech the precocious young second in command has delivered in his political career. It was also a speech that encapsulates an entire geopolitical era, that a return to prudence, sobriety, and nationalism as the hallmarks of American foreign affairs. This departure from post-Berlin Wall universalist liberalism has been a long time in the making, and Vance's incisive rebuke of European elites powerfully drove home the point. For the foreseeable future, U.S.-Europe relations will not be the same, and Josh Hammer says that is a good thing. He concludes this, what I feel is deeply incorrect analysis, perhaps being made in good faith. He concludes with, the post-Berlin Wall unipolar moment is long over. Nationalism and realism are not merely the flavors of the day. They are the flavors of the century. It would behoove Europe to get with the program. J.D. Vance is right. Now, I don't know much about Josh Hammer. I believe him to be, from his writing and from his CV, sympathetic to this new MAGA foreign policy orientation. But if you strip away his opinion from that writing, I mean, that's a pretty accurate assessment.
Well, I think that is the question that's at issue, right? Mm-hmm. Because he might be correct. It might be that this is the direction in which the world is traveling.
I guess these people could be right. Maybe this will make the world safer. We could be wrong, but we just have 80 years of evidence, give or take, that they're wrong.
Well, I mean, again, we're going to find out.
We are going to find out.
And I don't agree with Hammer about, in his support of this.
Sure.
But he's right about.
But he is assessing it correctly.
Yeah, about the ideological current in which we're beginning to swim. Now, one thing I will say that because of all these things, Hegseth's comments and Vance's speech, it has galvanized the European powers into finally seeming to understand, or at least beginning to understand, that they do need to get off their butts and start taking care of things on their own, because the United States isn't going to do it.
Or what could possibly go wrong with Europe rearming?
Well, don't count any chickens,
I know.
Right? Especially because we're killing them all because of bird flu.
Yeah.
But
that's next week.
Yeah. Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, on Monday and Tuesday, by the way, hosted a gathering of the six largest economies, that is, the heads of government of the six largest economies in Europe, and to talk about what they could do to have a more coordinated defense strategy.
Sure.
In fact, another thing that happened in Munich was that right before J.D. Vance spoke, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen made a speech in which she opened the idea of activating what's called the escape clause of the EU Constitution, which would allow countries to spend more on defense or other things, but in this case, defense. And so Macron's meeting was about, how are we going to do this? And, should we provide troops? In fact, even before this meeting, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, said that the UK would be willing to provide peacekeeping forces. And
very 19th century.
Yeah, very, right. And in fact, Macron himself had mentioned this, I believe, last year, at least talked about the possibility of doing so. The problem is that immediately after Monday's meeting, Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany, came out of the meeting and said, well, it's too early to talk about providing peacekeeping forces in reference to a peace deal that does not yet exist.
Sure.
I'm like,
he's not wrong.
Well, then why are you having an emergency summit, right? If it's too early to talk.
I mean, he's not wrong for kind of just making sure the messaging doesn't get
Well,
ahead of
okay.
him.
He's also not wrong because he's going to elections the next Sunday. All right.
Fair enough.
Honestly, that's
Right.
really what's
He's got to
going
walk.
on here.
Sure.
Yeah. Right.
He's got to
And
sanitize anything. Yeah.
yeah, and we'll talk more about that next week also in our very special episode about German elections. So but the point is that there was no unified statement coming out of this meeting. And it would have been helpful if there could have been, especially considering what happened the next day at Mar-a-Lago.
Okay. That leads us into the Marco/Mar-a-Lago portion of our episode.
Yes.
Now, one of the most enjoyable, certainly fascinating to me, elements of the Trump era has been both you, Sam Park, and me, John Ramey, finding ourselves in alignment with people we previously massively disagreed with regarding things like the Iraq War and other neocon positions, right? So I will quote right now from The Atlantic, a fine publication that I subscribe to. It is worth the annual subscription. One of Sam Park's favorite political minds, David Frum.
Oh,
Secretary of State Marco Rubio is in Saudi Arabia pretending to be in charge of negotiations between the U.S. and Russia over the fate of Ukraine. Rubio is the perfect fall guy for this assignment. Confirmed as Secretary of State by a 99-0 vote, he's won praise from all sides for his commitment to American institutions and values. Meanwhile, the real decisions are being made elsewhere. Parenthetically, we will insert Mar-a-Lago. Frum goes on. Trump blamed Ukraine for starting the war with Russia. That was at Mar-a-Lago.
yes.
Frum says, from the Oval Office, he is preparing a deal to give Russia the victory over Ukraine that it failed to win on the battlefield. The contemplated Trump deal would surrender Ukrainian territory to Russia and bar Ukraine from ever joining NATO. Trump wants an early end to sanctions on Russia, another unilateral U.S. concession to Putin. Earlier, Trump accepted the Russian position that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky should have to face re-election before peace talks begin. No such demand is being made of Putin. Now, I'm with David Frum on that.
Yeah, I am too. Although I can't stand him just generally. But there's
David, I enjoy you. Sorry, carry on.
there's so much here.
Yeah.
For example,
Well, Marco was supposed to be the neocon, the grown up in the room, right?
okay, well, I'd like to unpack that just a little bit because
Fair enough.
in this context, he still kind of is. For instance, in his appearance on Face the Nation, which was before he went to Saudi Arabia.
We need to
Right.
disclose if you have CBS/Viacom stock.
I don't.
I'm just teasing. No, they have great news still.
Yeah, here and there they do,
Yeah.
right? And in fact, in his comments after the meeting in Riyadh, Rubio was the only member of the administration who said things like, "Well, we're at the beginning of what was probably going to be a long process," right? Whereas just about every other member of the administration has said things like, "Hurry, urgent, quickly," right? That is that Trump wants this to be over, apparently. He wants to make the deal.
So
right?
you're telling me that Marco is between the lines, still the grown up in the room here?
Yes, he is.
Okay.
He's the only one saying, look, this is going to take a while, right? And by the way, if you're saying, oh, we're in a hurry to make a deal, which, again, the Treasury Secretary has said this, right? I mean, everybody seems to be on this page except Rubio, right? If you're saying I'm in a hurry to make it to wrap up these negotiations, you give your opponent the advantage, who could just sit there and say, "Oh well, I'm not."
Yeah.
Right? It's like, what if you really want to get this done quickly? What are you offering? And we seem to know what it is they are offering, which is just about everything that the Russians
front.
want. Yeah, just about, right? In fact, after the meeting in Riyadh between Rubio and the National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and the foreign minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov,
Shout out Lavrov.
who's been by Putin's side all the way through his presidency. That is the entirety of this century.
Yeah.
Lavrov said that if you listen to what his comments were, he seemed to think that the main focus of the meeting was to rehabilitate U.S.-Russia relations.
Yeah.
That Ukraine was just sort of, a symptom
Part of that.
Yeah, of the overall relations between the U.S. and Russia, right? They talked about, restoring diplomatic ties, things of this nature. Trump himself has said that he wants to welcome Russia back to the G7 meetings, and things like this. It's really, again, sort of great power spheres of influence stuff. And Ukraine is just a sort of afterthought.
Pawn.
Yeah. And that's why, I think that I believe anyway, that this is the reason that Zelensky finally seemed to have had enough, right? And reacted very, I think, perhaps ill-advisedly to what Trump had said. And now that seems today that these things might be getting patched up, but
I have a little more reporting on that. Speaking
okay,
of
please go
patching
right
up,
ahead.
The New York Times reports, after meeting with Russian negotiators to discuss the future of the war in Ukraine, Secretary of State Marco Rubio signaled a dramatic reset in relations with the Kremlin. Blah, blah, blah. Hours later, though, the New York Times, Mr. Rubio sought to reassure nervous European allies that the talks did not represent an abrupt departure from American policies, as many feared. Rather, the talks this week in Saudi Arabia's capital, Riyadh, were meant as a first step in a process, a test of whether the Kremlin was serious about making a deal, Mr. Rubio said in a call with several European diplomats. European officials were not sure what to make of Mr. Rubio's measured assessment, which came as leaders on the continent struggled to make sense of the apparent renewal of the relationship between Washington and Moscow. So yes, there's kind of, whether it's Zelensky, whether it's Rubio, everybody got a little hot under the collar, popped off, and now everybody's smoothing things over.
That seems to be. But again, Rubio seems to be playing the role of good cop, right? The problem is
that's about right.
In a game of good cop, bad cop, there's one of each, right? If you
not an administration of bad.
Yeah, if you've got one good cop and five bad cops, well, I mean, the things aren't going to go well for the suspect. And so, again, this is going to play out over the next weeks and months, hopefully months, mind you, right? We have to hope, again, absurdly, but we have to hope that Rubio's right, that this will be extended. Because if the deal is made very, very quickly, it's probably not going to go well for Ukraine.
Again, we take pointed policy. We have disagreements with how this new administration is handling foreign affairs because, as we've stated, there has been a post-World War II order, as imperfect as it's been, that has prevented great power war, which again is so deeply consequential now in a way that is unprecedented in human history, except for the end of the Second World War up till right now. There is a chance that this way works too, at least to preventing great power conflict. But if that is true, if this is right, if J.D. Vance is right, if Trump's kind of will handle our corner of the globe and everybody else can, piss off, that's bad too, right? Like the 19th century was fraught with great power conflict, but let's say we avoid it. There's still, it's just not a very harmonious world. Sorry to sound like a hippie. But, and I'm not saying I'm not saying the Pax Americana was pure bliss, right? I'm just
certainly not. But
if this actually works, it's also not great.
I mean, the point I would make is that the likelihood that it will work, I would say, is pretty slim. Just because the world is much smaller today than it was back then. Trump talks about this all the time. He's like, oh, well, we have an ocean. I mean, it's just like people.
ICBMs don't care about your
Yeah,
ocean.
people cross the ocean every day.
There's a
right?
submarine. There's submarines are sitting off your
It's
coast, buddy.
much easier to cross an ocean today than it was in those days. People do it in a few hours. It's just, the idea again. He seems to believe it actually is the 19th century. And by the way, I just sort of put this together the other day. The late 19th century is when Trump's grandfather immigrated to
Scotland.
the United States from Germany.
Germany,
In fact,
excuse me.
From Bavaria, where Munich is.
Right.
And so he seems to want to perhaps recreate his grandfather's American dream, which, now maybe I'm just extending this too much. But if that's the case, and in fact, even if it's not, this whole sort of age of imperialism framework that he seems to want to adopt, this was not a good time. Okay. I mean, it was when the whole world began to come apart, right? The wars and depredations of the 20th century were a direct outgrowth of that. And I would say a necessary one.
Sure.
And if we think we're going to get out of it any better than they did, we're wrong.
Cool. Okay. German elections next week.
Can't wait.
Nazis on the ballot. Sam, we might have hit a little lull around the holidays, but now I'm like, man, I can't wait to record this podcast.
Well, you know what? I mean, hopefully we're not missing a whole lot of stuff. The M23 has taken the Bukavu, the capital of South Kivu in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so that is another conflict that's actually raging out of control and that we might want to also start talking about again in future episodes. We'll see. Things are terrible in Sudan. There's a lot of other things to talk about also that we'll get to.
All right. So our tease is wars in Africa, ascendant Nazis in Germany, and we'll see you next week. Have a great week.
Thanks, folks.